A silent fleet of merchant ships once commanded the seas more effectively than any royal navy. This was the world of merchant republics, shadow empires, where gold held more power than crowns. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these states built a hidden framework for our modern global economy. We will uncover how they governed without a king and why their wealth-driven diplomacy challenged every rule of medieval power. What does it truly mean to rule without a throne? A lone merchant ship cuts through the pre-dawn fog, its hull heavy with silks and spices from the east. The captain's authority comes not from a royal decree, but from a ledger of investments and a shared percentage of the profits. This was the new spirit of an age, one that would birth entire states from such daring voyages. While feudal lords measured power in acres of land and the number of knights who swore them fealty, a quiet revolution was brewing in the coastal cities of Italy and the ports of northern Europe. Here, power was being counted in coins. These cities, often wedged between larger kingdoms, lacked a single, powerful monarch. Instead, they were governed by councils of their wealthiest and most successful merchants. Primary goal of this government was not to conquer new lands, but to conquer new markets. Think about that fundamental shift. While a king might go to war over a disputed valley, a merchant republic would dispatch a fleet to secure a trade route, a far more valuable prize. In places like Venice, the highest office, that of the Doge, was not a hereditary crown passed from father to son. He was an elected official, chosen by and from the commercial elite. This ensured that every law, every treaty, and every diplomatic mission was ultimately in service of business. The system was breathtakingly agile. A council of merchants could decide to fund an expedition or shift trade policies in a matter of weeks, while a kingdom might be bogged down for years by court intrigue and the raising of armies. This need for speed and reliability fueled incredible innovations. They developed early forms of international banking to move vast sums of money across continents without the physical risk of carrying chests of gold. They crafted complex contract law that allowed investors to back a voyage without setting foot on a ship, spreading risk and fueling even more ambitious ventures. One of the most stunning examples of this mercantile mindset made manifest was the Venetian Arsenal. This was not just a shipyard, it was a state-owned industrial complex so advanced it could produce a fully equipped merchant galley in a single day. Imagine the efficiency, the sheer logistical power. This was the engine of their empire, a testament to how these republics viewed their military and trade power as one and the same. So why would an ordinary citizen support such a system? Because their prosperity was directly tied to the Republic's success. A successful voyage meant more work for sailors, dockworkers, and craftsmen. It meant lower prices and more goods in the market. Their loyalty was to the flag that guaranteed their livelihood, a powerful bond forged in shared profit. This was the foundation of a new kind of authority, one built on ledgers and logistics, and it was about to stretch its influence across the known world. The Grand Canal at dawn was not a quiet waterway but a bustling artery of global commerce. Gondolas and heavy merchant cogs jostled for space, their holds packed with silks, spices, and gems from the east. This was the heart of the serene Republic of Venice, a city that defied its swampy origins to become a maritime superpower. Its founders chose the lagoon not for comfort, but for defense, creating a refuge that would evolve into an empire built on water. Venice mastered the sea lanes connecting Europe to the riches of Byzantium and beyond, turning its geographic isolation into an unbreakable strategic advantage. How did such a state govern itself without a king? The answer lies in a political machine designed to prevent any single person or family from seizing control. At its head was the Doge, an elected leader whose power was checked by a great council of merchant nobles. Their electoral process was famously complex, a labyrinth of lotteries and ballots intended to curb corruption and factionalism. This system ensured that power remained a shared enterprise among the commercial elite, a collective stewardship over the Republic's greatest asset, its trade. Venetian diplomacy was its silent weapon. While other states raised armies, Venice dispatched ambassadors and negotiators, their words backed by the formidable galleys of its navy. They secured exclusive treaties, most notably with the Byzantine Empire, which granted Venetian merchants privileged access to the legendary silk and spice trades. This was not conquest by the sword, but by contract. To support this vast commercial network, Venice established a chain of colonial outposts. Islands like Crete and Cyprus were not conquered for territorial glory, but were acquired as strategic way stations, fortified warehouses that allowed Venetian goods and influence to flow uninterrupted across the Mediterranean. The true symbol of Venetian power, however, was not a fortress or a fleet, but a coin. The Venetian gold ducat became the trusted currency of international trade for centuries, its purity and reliability undisputed from London to Alexandria. This financial hegemony meant the world literally ran on Venetian money. The Republic's ability to sustain prosperity for centuries without a single crowned ruler stands as a powerful testament to the stability of its mercantile model. But Venice did not exist in a vacuum. Its success inevitably bred a rival, another merchant republic that would challenge its dominance with a different, equally ruthless approach to business and power. While Venice perfected its serene and centralized state, the rugged coastline of Liguria bred a different kind of power. Genoa's sailors were not servants of a unified republic, but daring entrepreneurs navigating tempestuous seas and even more volatile politics. Their city was a cauldron of fierce independence, where rival clans like the Doria and Spinola families vied for dominance within elected councils, turning governance into a high-stakes competition. This constant internal friction could have been a fatal weakness, yet it fueled a system of breathtaking private enterprise. While Venice dispatched state-funded fleets, Genoa's trade networks stretched from the Black Sea to the Atlantic on the backs of privately financed voyages, each captain and investor betting their own fortune on the winds of commerce. This relentless drive for profit demanded financial ingenuity. To protect their massive investments in perilous sea journeys, Genoa's merchants pioneered early forms of marine insurance, allowing them to spread the risk of a sunken ship across many investors. They refined systems of credit that could move money across Europe with a letter of exchange, laying the groundwork for modern banking. Their financial acumen became legendary, and it was this expertise that drew the attention of European kings. During the Crusades, it was Genoa's fleets that often transported armies to the Holy Land. They were not driven by religious fervor, but by meticulously negotiated contracts. In exchange for their ships, they demanded and received coveted trading privileges in critical ports like Acre, carving out their own commercial colonies in the heart of the conflict. This mercantile ambition inevitably collided with Venetian interests, sparking a series of devastating wars. The War of Chioggia was not a clash of dynasties, but a brutal corporate war fought with galleys and siege engines, where the prize was monopoly over the most lucrative trade routes. The ultimate expression of Genoa's financial power was the Banco di San Giorgio. Established in the 15th century, this was not merely a bank, it was a private institution that took over the management of the entire republic's public debt and even administered its overseas colonies. For a time, the bank acted as a state within a state, a sobering reminder of where true power often resided. So, how did this decentralized, often chaotic system compare to Venice's orderly model? Genoa's weakness was its internal strife, which sometimes left it paralyzed, but its great strength was the raw, competitive energy of its citizens, whose personal ambition drove innovation and expanded their commercial reach to the very edges of the known world. This relentless spirit of competition was not confined to the Mediterranean, as a different model of merchant rule was taking shape in the cold northern seas. Far from the sun-drenched Mediterranean, the power of commerce was being forged in the cold, grey ports of the Baltic Sea. In harbors thick with the scent of salt and pine, German merchants gathered in timber-framed guild halls, their conversations a quiet hum over barrels of fur and wax. They were not citizens of a single city, but members of something entirely new, the Hanseatic League. This was not a republic but a confederation, a sprawling alliance of nearly 200 towns and cities from Lübeck to Hamburg, bound together by a simple, powerful principle: mutual profit. Without a central king or capital, the League's authority flowed from a shared commitment to protect their trade routes and dominate the markets of Northern Europe. How could such a vast and diverse network possibly hold together? The answer lay in a revolutionary form of collective bargaining. The League's power was its economic bloc. When a foreign power threatened the interests of one member city, the entire League could impose a trade embargo, a collective boycott that could cripple a kingdom's economy without a single sword being drawn. Their greatest weapon was not the knight but the ledger. This collective might require a unique system of governance. Representatives from the member cities would periodically gather in a Hanseatic Diet, a grand assembly where policies were debated and voted upon. Each city, regardless of its size, had a voice, but the guiding star for every decision was a single question: what is best for business? This ensured that the alliance remained focused on commercial advantage, not the territorial ambitions of any single prince or lord. To project their influence, the League established fortified trading posts known as contours in distant cities like Novgorod, London, and Bruges. These were not mere warehouses, but semi-autonomous enclaves operating under Hanseatic law. Imagine a walled German quarter within medieval London where merchants lived by their own rules, settled their own disputes, and answered to their own elected officials. The contour in Novgorod, for instance, was so isolated during the harsh Russian winters that it developed into a self-sufficient mini-state, a testament to the League's ability to create order and community purely for trade. Yet this very strength contained the seeds of its decline. The League's loose structure, so effective in its heyday, could not withstand the rising tide of powerful, centralized nation-states like England and the Netherlands. These new kingdoms began to enforce their own trade laws and build their own navies, chipping away at the Hanseatic monopolies. Internally, the cities began to squabble over their share of the profits, their unity fraying without a central authority to compel cooperation. Despite its eventual dissolution, the League's legacy is woven into the fabric of modern commerce. It pioneered standardized trade practices, from weights and measures to legal codes for merchants, that smoothed the path of international business for centuries. It funded the magnificent brick Gothic architecture that still defines northern European cityscapes, turning its commercial wealth into enduring urban beauty. The Hanseatic League proved that a common economic interest could bind vastly different cultures into a formidable force, a lesson in cooperation that resonates to this day. From the centralized state of Venice to the competitive clans of Genoa and the sprawling alliance of the Hanseatic League, a clear pattern of merchant rule begins to emerge. Inside a grand council chamber, The debates did not revolve around royal bloodlines or ancestral lands, but around the price of wool and the terms of a shipping contract. This was the political heart of a merchant republic, a space where governance was an extension of the marketplace. The shared framework these states developed was a masterclass in pragmatic rule, designed by and for the commercial class. At its core, most featured an elected executive, a doge or a mayor, whose power was balanced by a larger assembly drawn from the guilds and the wealthiest citizens. This structure guaranteed that every law passed and every treaty signed was scrutinized through one lens: its potential impact on trade and profit. To prevent this system from being hijacked by a single powerful family, they engineered remarkable political innovations. Venice's famously convoluted election process, a sequence of lotteries and ballots, was not mere bureaucracy. It was a deliberate firewall against corruption and dynastic ambition. The goal was to make the state itself a stable and reliable business partner. This alignment of governance with commercial success created a powerful incentive for long-term planning. Republics consistently invested their wealth back into the infrastructure of trade, building superior ports, fortified warehouses, and public shipyards that became the envy of kingdoms. Legal standardization was another cornerstone of their success. The Hanseatic League did not have an emperor, but it did have a universal commercial code that governed transactions from Novgorod to London. These rules standardized weights and measures, outlined clear procedures for arbitration, and established reliable contract law. For a merchant sending his goods across treacherous seas, this legal predictability was priceless. It drastically reduced the risk of doing business with strangers, fostering a network of trust that allowed capital and goods to flow freely across vast distances. Many of these republics also pioneered early forms of written constitutions, codifying the rights and responsibilities of their citizens. Representation was often organized through guilds, ensuring that the interests of key industries like shipbuilding or banking had a direct voice in government. They were often surprisingly inclusive, granting certain legal protections and residency rights to foreign merchants, understanding that attracting international trade was more valuable than clinging to narrow definitions of citizenship. When compared to the rigid, land-focused hierarchies of medieval monarchies, the advantage of these mercantile governments becomes clear. A king's authority was often tied to tradition and military might, making him slow to adapt to shifting economic winds. A council of merchants, however, lived and breathed those shifts. Their entire system was built on flexibility and a relentless focus on the bottom line, allowing them to pivot policies, fund new ventures, and forge new alliances with a speed no royal court could ever match. This political agility was the bedrock upon which they built their vast economic engines, machines of commerce that would redefine wealth itself. A bill of exchange was more valuable than a chest of gold. This simple piece of paper promising payment in a distant city was the financial engine that powered the merchant republics, transforming local markets into a truly global economy. Their wealth was built not on common goods, but on the high-value, low-bulk luxuries that could travel thousands of miles and still turn an immense profit. A single shipment of pepper, cinnamon, or Chinese silk could fund a fleet, all because demand in Europe was insatiable. To finance these perilous, long-distance voyages, early banking institutions emerged, offering loans and letters of credit that allowed a merchant in Genoa to pay for spices in Alexandria with funds deposited by his partner back home. This system of moving money without moving physical coin was a revolutionary leap, drastically reducing the risk of piracy and theft. But how could investors trust the accounts of a captain halfway across the world? The answer was found in the ledgers of Italian merchants, who perfected a system known as double-entry bookkeeping. Every transaction was recorded twice as both a debit and a credit, creating a clear and transparent financial picture. This was not just better accounting, it was the birth of corporate transparency, enabling complex partnerships and attracting capital from silent investors who could now trust the numbers. This financial clarity fueled even larger ventures, leading to the creation of joint stock companies, particularly in Genoa. These were the ancestors of the modern corporation, pooling capital from dozens or even hundreds of investors to fund a single, high-risk expedition to the Black Sea or the Atlantic coast of Africa. If one ship sank, no single merchant was ruined. The loss was distributed across all the shareholders. This brilliant mechanism of spreading risk democratized wealth creation and funded exploration on an unprecedented scale. This entire commercial ecosystem relied on one crucial ingredient: trust. The Hanseatic League understood this better than anyone. They enforced standardized weights and measures across their vast network, from London to Novgorod. A pound of wax in Lubeck had to be identical to a pound of wax in their distant trading post, the Contour of Novgorod. This predictability built a framework of trust among traders who spoke different languages and followed different customs, allowing commerce to flow smoothly. The ultimate expression of this economic power was the monopoly. Venice did not merely trade spices, it controlled the spice trade. Through a series of shrewd and often ruthless deals with the Mamluk and later the Ottoman empires, Venetian merchants secured exclusive access to the routes bringing eastern spices into the Mediterranean. For a time, if Europe wanted pepper, it had to go through Venice, allowing the Republic to set prices that guaranteed staggering profits. This was not free market capitalism as we know it, but a mercantilist system designed to concentrate wealth and power. The resilience of these economies lay in their adaptability and their relentless focus on profit as the ultimate measure of success. They created the financial tools, the legal frameworks, and the corporate structures that would later fuel the age of exploration and eventually evolve into the foundations of our modern global economy. But such immense wealth could not be protected by ledgers alone. It required a different kind of power, one exercised not in the counting house, but in the shadowy corridors of international diplomacy. A Venetian ambassador kneels not before a king, but a sultan, offering bolts of fine cloth and promises of profitable commerce instead of threats. This was the true face of merchant republic diplomacy, a subtle art where the most powerful weapon was a favorable trade agreement. For these states, foreign relations were not about expanding borders, but about keeping the lanes of commerce wide open. They perfected a policy of calculated neutrality, refusing to take sides in the wars that raged between kingdoms unless their own ports or shipping lanes were directly threatened. Why risk a profitable relationship with both sides by choosing one? This pragmatic stance allowed them to trade with all parties, often supplying both warring factions for a premium, their loyalty pledged only to the balance sheet. To manage these delicate relationships, they pioneered a system of permanent embassies and consulates in foreign capitals. These were not just ceremonial posts, they were early intelligence networks. A skilled ambassador was a master of information, gathering crucial details about political instability, harvest yields, and market demands, then using that knowledge to negotiate exclusive trade deals or lower tariffs for his republic's merchants. The Genoese were masters of this double game. During the long and brutal struggles between the Byzantine Empire and the rising Ottoman Turks, Genoese merchants expertly played both sides. They would loan money to a Byzantine emperor while simultaneously securing lucrative contracts to supply the Ottoman armies. Their goal was never the victory of one empire over the other, but the preservation of their own trading posts and the favorable tax rates they had negotiated in the strategic straits of the Bosphorus. Similarly, the Hanseatic League used its economic might to forge treaties with Scandinavian kingdoms. In one famous arrangement, the League agreed to provide its powerful fleet to protect Danish and Norwegian waters from pirates. In return, Hanseatic merchants received something far more valuable than gold: complete exemption from the Sound tolls, the taxes levied on all ships passing through the narrow straits controlling access to the Baltic Sea. This single deal gave them an overwhelming competitive advantage for centuries. How different was this from the diplomacy of kings? Royal alliances were often sealed with a marriage or a feudal oath, bonds that were personal, rigid, and passed down through generations. Merchant republic alliances were transactional, flexible, and could be dissolved as soon as they were no longer profitable. This fluidity was their great strength, but it also carried immense risk. A king bound by honor might come to an ally's aid, but a council of merchants would only act if it served their immediate financial interest, leaving them with few permanent friends. This entire system of soft power, however, would have collapsed without a robust legal framework to back it up. A promise of lowered tariffs was worthless if it could not be enforced in a foreign court, and a complex shipping contract was just paper without a clear system of arbitration. The merchant republics understood that their wealth depended on the rule of law, not just the rule of the strongest. The courtroom was a ship's deck, and the judge a fellow merchant. In the bustling port cities of the merchant republics, justice was not a distant echo of a king's command, but a practical tool for resolving commercial disputes with speed and fairness. These Admiralty courts operated on a foundation of consensual codes, laws born from the shared experience of the sea itself, not handed down by a remote monarch. This legal autonomy was the bedrock of their commercial empire, creating a predictable environment where a trader from Genoa could confidently do business with a shipmaster from Barcelona, trusting that a common set of rules would protect them both. Across Europe, these maritime laws were codified into influential collections like the Rolls of Oleron. These were not abstract legal theories, but practical handbooks that answered the pressing questions of seafaring life. They dictated exactly how to compensate a sailor injured in a storm, how to divide the profits from salvaging a wrecked vessel, and how to handle disputes over damaged cargo. This clarity was everything. A captain knew his rights and responsibilities before he even left port, which encouraged more voyages and more investment. The system prioritized swift justice. A dispute over a cargo of wool or a broken shipping contract could not languish for years in a feudal court. The goods would spoil and the opportunity would be lost. Instead, merchant courts relied on neutral arbitration and panels of expert judges who understood the intricacies of trade. Their goal was to get commerce flowing again as quickly as possible, a stark contrast to the slow, often corrupt wheels of royal justice. This commitment to legal transparency extended to language itself. While most of Europe's monarchies conducted official business in Latin, a language of scholars and clerics, republics like Venice codified their statutes in the vernacular Italian that everyone spoke. A foreign merchant could read and understand the laws that governed his transactions, fostering a powerful sense of trust and inclusion. The Republic's highest official, the Doge, was himself bound by this system. His inaugural oath, the Promession Ducale, was a detailed contract that explicitly committed him to uphold the commercial laws of the state, preventing any slide into arbitrary or tyrannical rule. This web of law was woven together by the diligent work of notaries, who recorded every contract, loan, and partnership in meticulous detail. Their sealed documents were legally binding, creating an irrefutable paper trail that enforced debt repayment and protected property rights, even for non-citizens. How did these legal innovations fuel growth? They reduced the inherent risk of long-distance trade to a manageable level. Knowing that contracts would be honored and disputes resolved fairly, merchants were willing to invest larger sums, fund riskier voyages, and engage with partners from different cultures. This legal safety net directly stimulated economic expansion, and the wealth it generated did not simply accumulate in private coffers. It spilled over into every aspect of urban life, funding a cultural blossoming that would rival the courts of any king. The grand festival in Genoa pulsed with an energy unknown in feudal castles, its rhythms set by the clinking of coins and the polyglot chatter of the harbor. This was not a celebration of a royal birth, but of civic pride, funded by the guilds and merchant families who saw their city's splendor as the best advertisement for its wealth. Within these republics, the social order possessed a fluidity that would have been unthinkable on a feudal manor. A commoner who amassed a fortune through shrewd trade could, within a generation, find his son sitting on a governing council. This was a world where talent and commercial acumen could trump ancient lineage, creating a powerful incentive for innovation and ambition across all levels of society. That newfound wealth was lavishly displayed in stone and paint. St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, with its shimmering golden mosaics and stolen relics, was not merely a place of worship. It was a monumental piece of commercial propaganda, designed to awe every foreign merchant and diplomat who stepped into the Piazza San Marco, silently communicating the Republic's immense power and divine favor. This patronage extended to the very streets, with merchant families competing to fund magnificent churches, hospitals, and guild halls that served as both centers of community and vital networking hubs for business deals. How did this mercantile world view education? The chronicler Giovanni Villani noted that in Florence, thousands of children attended schools not to study chivalric romance, but to master the practical arts of double-entry bookkeeping and foreign languages. Literacy and numeracy were the true knightly virtues here, the essential tools for navigating contracts and managing international correspondence. This focus cultivated a set of values that prized thrift, calculation, and a cosmopolitan openness to new ideas and peoples from distant lands. Yet this glittering urban culture cast long shadows. The very social mobility that defined these states also created stark inequalities. A vast underclass of laborers, sailors, and servants toiled with little hope of climbing the economic ladder, their lives a world apart from the patricians in their marble palaces. And while the cities flourished, the surrounding countryside was often neglected, viewed merely as a source of food and raw materials rather than an integral part of the state. The daily life of a citizen was a constant negotiation between profit and piety, between the relentless pursuit of wealth and the deep-seated need for spiritual salvation. This tension gave rise to a fascinating duality, where a merchant might haggle ruthlessly in the market by day, then spend his evening commissioning an altarpiece to atone for his sins, investing in the afterlife with the same strategic care he applied to his earthly ledgers. The clatter of wooden clogs on stone bridges marked the start of another day in Venice. Before the sun had fully risen, the Rialto market was already a cacophony of shouted prices and haggling voices, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices and the salt of the sea. This was the true rhythm of the Republic, a daily symphony of commerce where every citizen, from the lowly porter to the wealthy patrician, played a part. Life was organized around the powerful guilds, associations for every trade from glassblowers to silk weavers. These were more than just professional clubs. They set quality standards, trained apprentices, and provided a crucial safety net for members who fell ill or into poverty. During spectacular festivals like the Marriage to the Sea, it was the guilds that funded the grandest floats and processions, turning civic pride into a vibrant public spectacle. Within the family, wealth was not hoarded but continuously reinvested. A common strategy was to send a younger son to manage a branch of the family business in Alexandria or London, a practice that wove a web of cultural and commercial exchange across continents. These young men learned new languages and customs, returning home with not only profits but also new ideas that slowly transformed their own city. While women were barred from the political councils, they often held significant economic power. A merchant's wife or widow was frequently expected to manage the entire business during her husband's long absences at sea, negotiating contracts, supervising accounts, and defending the family's commercial interests with shrewd determination. This offered a level of financial autonomy almost unheard of in the rural manners of feudal Europe. Even high-level politics blended with social life. When delegates of the Hanseatic League gathered for their diet meetings, the agenda mixed solemn debates over trade embargoes with lavish feasts and lively tournaments. This fusion of work and leisure strengthened the personal bonds that underpinned their vast commercial alliance. How did this bustling, uncertain urban existence compare to the predictable cycles of a farming village? The potential for social mobility was far greater, but so was the anxiety. A single storm sinking a merchant galley could wipe out a family's fortune, and the constant pressure to compete bred a unique kind of stress. The very commercial energy that fueled these cities also demanded a relentless pace, a world away from the slower, land-bound tempo of feudal life. This vibrant, high-stakes society, however, could not survive on profit alone. It needed to be defended not by castles but by a new kind of military force. A Venetian war galley cuts through the waves, its purpose not conquest but escort. This sleek vessel, funded by a tax on pepper, existed for a single reason: to ensure the safe passage of the merchant ships that were the Republic's lifeblood. The military might of merchant republics was a tool for commerce, an extension of their ledgers onto the high seas. They invested heavily in powerful navies, recognizing that a protected sea lane was worth far more than a conquered fortress. This defensive focus meant their fleets prized speed and mobility above all else, designed to respond rapidly to pirate threats or to blockade a rival's port in a trade dispute. For land conflicts, they displayed a different kind of pragmatism. Why maintain a costly, permanent army that would drain the treasury and take citizens away from their work in the shipyards and counting houses? Instead, they hired professional mercenary companies, paying for soldiers only when absolutely necessary. This kept the economic engine of the state running uninterrupted, its people focused on generating the wealth that paid for their defense. Naval innovation was driven by these commercial needs. The Genoa's mastery of the lateen sail, a triangular rig adopted from Arab traders, gave their galleys an unmatched ability to sail close to the wind. This was not a mere technical improvement. It was a critical business advantage, allowing their convoys to outmaneuver both pirates and bad weather, delivering goods faster and more reliably than their competitors. The Hanseatic League projected its power without declaring war. Their fortified trading posts, the contours, were defensive strongholds designed to protect their goods and merchants. To secure the Baltic, they funded privateers, privately owned ships authorized to attack their enemies' vessels. This strategy allowed the League to dominate sea lanes and punish rivals while maintaining a facade of peaceful trade, a form of deniable warfare perfectly suited to a merchant alliance. So how did this purely pragmatic approach to defense shape their history? It granted them remarkable longevity, as their states avoided the ruinous costs and political risks of constant land wars. Yet this very strength contained a profound vulnerability. Their reliance on hired soldiers meant that in a moment of true existential crisis, they could not always count on the loyalty of a citizen army. Their power was projected across the water, leaving their land borders potentially exposed. This naval prowess did more than just protect. It enabled a quiet form of empire building, creating colonial networks that would stretch their commercial influence to the very edges of the known world. A Genoese merchant in the Crimean port of Kaffa haggled not over a few coins but over human lives. His ledger listed spices, furs, and slaves, goods flowing from the vast Mongol steppes into the heart of Europe. This remote outpost was the sharp edge of a commercial empire, a world away from the grand palaces of Genoa. These colonies were not about planting flags or converting souls. They were sophisticated, self-sustaining machines for profit. Their purpose was threefold: to extract resources, to facilitate cultural exchange, and to project diplomatic influence far beyond the reach of the home republic. A place like the Venetian-controlled island of Crete was not just a military base, it was a vast, sun-baked plantation. There, local farmers cultivated sugar and wine for export, their labor feeding a luxury market back in Europe and generating immense wealth for Venetian landowners. Similarly, the Hanseatic contour in Bergen, Norway, was a fortified compound where German merchants controlled the entire stockfish trade, drying and shipping cod from the rich northern seas to feed Catholic Europe on fast days. These outposts were granted remarkable autonomy to keep trade flowing smoothly. An appointed governor or consul answered to the home city, but his daily task was to negotiate with local rulers, settle disputes among merchants, and ensure that the precious cargo ships departed on schedule. He operated like a corporate chief executive officer for a distant branch, empowered to make quick decisions to avoid losing a deal, but always with one eye on the balance sheet sent back to headquarters. The real key to their success was cultural adaptation. To thrive in places like the Aegean, Venetian settlers on Negropont did not impose their own way of life. They learned Greek, intermarried with local aristocratic families, and adopted Byzantine architectural styles, creating a unique blended culture that made trade and coexistence possible. Travelers of the era wrote with astonishment of these hybrid societies, where Italian church bells tolled alongside the calls from local mosques or Orthodox churches. Yet this system was fraught with peril. These colonies lived under constant threat, not from the local populations they traded with, but from their rival republics. A Genoese colony was a permanent provocation to Venice and vice versa. They were also vulnerable to shifts in distant politics. A new Khan or a new Sultan could revoke their hard-won trading privileges overnight. How did this colonial model differ from the empires of kings? A royal colony, like those later established by Spain or Portugal, was about permanent settlement, religious conversion, and the direct extraction of tribute for a crown. The merchant republics wanted access, not acreage. They built warehouses, not cathedrals, and their primary goal was to control the flow of commerce, not the souls of the people. This very focus on profit above all else, however, planted the seeds of future conflict, as the competition for these lucrative outposts pushed the republics toward ever more direct and devastating confrontations. The burning hulks of Venetian and Genoese galleys littered the lagoon of Chioggia, a harbor choked with the smoke of commercial warfare. This was not a clash of kings, but a corporate battle where the prize was the spice trade itself. For nearly a year, Venice fought for its very survival against its arch-rival Genoa, a conflict driven not by a disputed succession or religious schism, but by a simple, brutal calculation of market share. The entire economy of the Mediterranean had become a chessboard, and the merchant republics were playing for total control. Their wars were fought over exclusive access, over who could charge a premium for pepper or silk. They understood that a monopoly on a single trade route was more valuable than the conquest of an entire province. This economic logic led them to perfect the arts of proxy war and commercial espionage. Why risk your own fleet in a direct confrontation when you could fund a rival's enemy, or use skilled agents to steal the secret nautical charts that detailed the safest passages through treacherous waters? The Hanseatic League mastered this form of economic coercion in its long struggle with the Kingdom of Denmark. Their goal was not to annex Danish territory, but to secure a priceless commercial advantage, permanent exemption from the Sound tolls. To achieve this, the League deployed its most potent weapon, the trade embargo. They would blockade the Baltic, refusing to export the grain, timber, and salt that Denmark itself relied upon, slowly strangling the royal treasury until the king had no choice but to grant their demand. This was warfare waged with cargo manifests and account books, a demonstration that financial pressure could be as decisive as any siege. Yet, even the most calculated strategies could spiral into devastating direct conflict. The long series of Venetian-Ottoman wars present a sobering case study. Initially, Venice pursued a policy of cautious diplomacy with the rising Ottoman Empire, seeking to preserve its lucrative trade deals. But when the Ottomans began to directly threaten Venetian colonies and choke off their access to eastern markets, the Republic was forced to respond with military force. These wars were staggeringly expensive, draining the Venetian treasury to fund fleets and fortifications. The battles were often tactical victories for Venice, yet they rarely resulted in any permanent expansion of power. The pattern was one of slow, grinding attrition, a fight to maintain commercial relevance against an empire whose vast resources and territorial ambitions operated on a completely different scale. How did these relentless rivalries reshape Europe? They forged a political landscape where economic power was a primary currency of statecraft, forcing even traditional monarchies to consider trade networks and banking interests in their diplomatic calculations. The constant competition spurred naval innovation, from ship design to navigation, that would later enable the age of exploration. The great lesson of this economic warfare is its dual nature, a tool that could secure immense wealth but also lead to ruinous overextension. For every blockade that brought a king to his knees, there was a long war that slowly bled a republic dry. Yet amidst this landscape of perpetual competition, a different, more pragmatic impulse sometimes surfaced, a recognition that even rivals could find common cause when the numbers added up. A Hanseatic delegate and an English wool merchant toasted their new agreement not with a feudal oath, but with a clinking of silver cups, their alliance sealed against the pirates plaguing the North Sea. This was the essence of merchant republic diplomacy, a world of temporary, goal-oriented coalitions built for mutual profit. These were not bonds of blood or sworn loyalty, but pragmatic partnerships that could be formed or dissolved as market conditions changed. A shared economic interest was the only glue required, and the primary enforcement mechanism was not the threat of an army, but the chilling prospect of a trade embargo or revoked commercial privileges. Historians point to Venice's long-running arrangement with the Byzantine Empire as a perfect template. The Venetians provided their formidable navy to patrol Byzantine waters, and in return, their merchants received sweeping tax exemptions within Byzantine ports. This was not an alliance of friendship, but a calculated exchange of military service for unparalleled market access, a model replicated in various forms across the Mediterranean. Within Italy itself, the Lombard League presented a powerful example of cities banding together for commercial survival. This coalition of northern city-states, including Milan and Venice, united not under a single king but around a common goal: to resist the encroaching power of the Holy Roman Emperor and protect their hard-won autonomy and trade routes. Their victory was a testament to what flexible, interest-driven partnerships could achieve against a more rigid, centralized power. How did these fluid coalitions compare to the permanent alliances of kings? A royal marriage or a feudal vow created obligations that could last for generations, often dragging states into wars that served no immediate interest. The merchant republics suffered no such sentimental attachments. Their alliances were tools picked up when useful and set aside when a better deal presented itself. This freedom from binding long-term commitments was a tremendous strategic advantage, allowing them to pivot with the shifting winds of global commerce. Yet this very flexibility was also a source of profound instability. What held these coalitions together was a cold calculus of profit, and that calculation could change in an instant. A partner one season could become a ruthless competitor the next, as Genoa and Venice demonstrated repeatedly. This constant realignment fostered an atmosphere of deep-seated suspicion, where even the most promising partnership was haunted by the specter of a future betrayal. This external volatility was often mirrored by turmoil within the Republic's own walls, where the relentless pursuit of wealth created internal fractures that threatened to tear them apart from the inside. The gilded facades of merchant palaces could not always conceal the anger simmering in the streets below. In Genoa, a mob of shipwrights and weavers, their livelihoods squeezed by unfair taxes, might storm a government building, their fury a stark contrast to the orderly world of commerce. For all their outward prosperity, these republics were brittle containers for intense social pressures. The very wealth that built their magnificent cities also forged deep class divisions. A small circle of elite families, often calling themselves patricians, typically monopolized the highest offices and the most lucrative trade monopolies. They crafted laws that protected their own interests, leaving the vast majority of artisans, sailors, and shopkeepers with little political voice and a heavy tax burden. This systemic inequality was a ticking clock, and when it chimed, the result was often explosive revolt. In Florence, the Ciompi uprising saw wool workers seize control of the city, briefly establishing a government for the lower classes before the old elite ruthlessly crushed them. These were not mere riots, they were fundamental challenges to the idea that a state run by merchants could truly represent all its people. Factionalism was another poison in the well of governance. The legendary feud between the Guelphs and Ghibellines was not some abstract political debate. It was a vicious street-level struggle that divided Italian cities for generations. In republics like Genoa, this conflict translated into powerful families like the Grimaldi and the Doria, turning the council chambers into battlegrounds, their private armies clashing in the squares. This constant internal warfare could paralyze a government for years, making it impossible to respond to external threats or economic opportunities. A rival family would rather see the city fail than see their domestic enemies succeed, a level of political sabotage that often left the republic weak and exposed, an open invitation for a foreign king or emperor to step in and take control. Economic fragility was the third and perhaps most dangerous weakness. A merchant republic's strength was its commercial focus, but this was also its greatest vulnerability. A single bad harvest, a naval blockade, or the sudden closure of a key trade route could trigger a devastating chain reaction. Banks would fail, businesses would close, and unemployment would soar. The Hanseatic League learned this lesson painfully when member cities like Cologne and Brunswick rebelled, furious that the League's centralized policies seemed to benefit a few powerful ports like Lübeck at their expense. These internal rebellions forced the League to grant more autonomy, weakening the very unity that had been its source of power. How did republics try to manage this simmering discontent? Some, like Venice, created sophisticated state-sponsored grain stores to ensure the poor were fed during a famine, a practical measure to buy social peace. Others expanded charity through the guilds or created minor political offices for middle-class citizens, offering just enough participation to dull the edge of rebellion. Yet these were often stopgap measures, reforms designed to preserve the existing power structure rather than transform it. The internal struggle between the relentless pursuit of profit and the basic need for social stability was a battle these republics never fully resolved, a crack in their foundation that would be exploited by the new, powerful forces gathering on the horizon. The thunder of Ottoman cannons was not just the fall of a city, but the collapse of a commercial world order. When Constantinople finally fell, the reverberations shook the very foundations of Venice's wealth, severing the most vital artery of its spice trade. This was the first great shock, a brutal demonstration that the Republic's intricate networks were terrifyingly vulnerable to the rising power of vast, centralized empires. These new states, like France and Spain, were built on a different scale, their authority radiating from a single monarch who commanded immense standing armies and pursued a policy of aggressive economic nationalism known as mercantilism. Under this system, a kingdom's power was measured by the gold in its royal coffers, and its goal was to achieve self-sufficiency, hoarding precious metals by exporting as much as possible while importing as little as possible from rivals. For the merchant republics, this was a death sentence. Their entire model relied on being the indispensable middlemen, the facilitators of global exchange. Now they were being deliberately cut out, their ships barred from New World colonies and their goods hit with punishing tariffs designed to protect a king's own merchants. A Spanish diplomat of the era coolly observed that Genoa had become little more than a bank for his empire, its financiers lending vast sums to the Spanish crown while its political independence slowly evaporated. The Genoese, masters of liquidity, found their fate tied to the debts of a foreign king, a precarious position that traded sovereignty for financial influence. Then came the most devastating blow of all, a geographical revolution that rendered their greatest assets obsolete. The age of exploration, driven by Portuguese and Spanish navigators, unlocked sea routes that bypassed the Mediterranean entirely. A Portuguese carrack rounding the Cape of Good Hope could sail directly to the source of spices in India, unloading its cargo in Lisbon for a fraction of the cost of the overland caravans and Venetian galleys. The Mediterranean, once the center of the world, was suddenly a backwater. The wealth of the globe now flowed into the Atlantic ports of Seville, Antwerp, and London. The Hanseatic League suffered a similar fate. The Dutch and English, with their powerful state-chartered companies like the Dutch East India Company, simply overwhelmed the League's decentralized network. How could a confederation of independent cities compete with a single corporate entity that had the full military and financial backing of a nation-state? They could not. The Dutch began sailing directly into the Baltic, breaking the Hanseatic monopoly on grain and timber, while English merchants established their own thriving cloth trade with the continent. The League's contours were shuttered one by one, their privileges revoked by newly assertive local rulers. So, how did the republics respond to this existential crisis? Some, like Genoa, accepted a diminished role as financiers and administrators for the new powers. Others, like Venice, fought a long rearguard action, desperately trying to defend their remaining territories and shifting their trade towards new, if less glamorous, goods. But the fundamental architecture of their power was gone. They were agile galleys in an age of massive, ocean-going galleons, their strengths no longer matching the demands of a transformed world. Their decline was not a sudden collapse, but a slow fading, a story of commercial empires being outmaneuvered by the raw geopolitical force of the nation-state. Yet, as their political power waned, the systems they had invented for the world of commerce were only just beginning their own, much longer, journey. A modern corporate boardroom, with its elected directors and focus on shareholder value, operates on a principle first perfected by merchant republics: representative rule driven by economic outcomes. The entire framework of our global economy sits upon foundations they laid stone by stone. Their early forms of marine insurance, born from the need to protect a single ship's cargo, have evolved into the complex global insurance markets that underwrite everything from international shipping to satellite launches. The bill of exchange, a simple promise to pay in another city, is the direct ancestor of the letters of credit that finance world trade today. Even the idea of a corporation itself, a legal entity separate from its owners that can own property and enter contracts, was refined in the bustling ports of Genoa and Venice, allowing risk to be shared and capital to be pooled on an unprecedented scale. This mercantile logic extended beyond finance into the very idea of the state. The concept of civic nationalism, where your identity and rights come from your participation in a commercial community rather than a shared ethnicity or a feudal lord, was their profound innovation. This model of a state built on commerce, not conquest, directly inspired later republics. The Dutch Republic of the 17th century, a confederation of prosperous trading provinces, consciously mirrored the Hanseatic League structure. Even the early American Republic, with its deep suspicion of inherited power and its embrace of a government designed to protect property and encourage commerce, echoed the political philosophy of these medieval merchant states. Their greatest political export, however, was a system to prevent the concentration of power. The Venetian model of a doge checked by councils and complex electoral laws was studied intently by Enlightenment thinkers like Montesquieu. He saw in Venice a practical example of separated powers, a blueprint he would later argue was essential for any free government, an idea that would resonate in the halls of Philadelphia during the drafting of the American Constitution. Their diplomatic tools feel equally familiar in our modern world. The permanent embassy, staffed with career diplomats gathering intelligence and negotiating treaties, was a Venetian specialty. The use of neutral arbitration to resolve international commercial disputes, a practice perfected in the Admiralty courts of the Hanseatic League, is now a standard feature of global business. We still navigate a world shaped by their belief that commerce, more than conquest, is the ultimate foundation of lasting power. So where do we see their legacy today? Look at the skylines of our financial districts, the rules of the World Trade Organization, or the very idea that a nation's strength is measured by its economic output and trade balance. This mercantile worldview, born in the shadow of empires, now defines our global order, and long after their political influence faded, the wealth they generated continued to speak, immortalized in the stone and canvas of a continent's cultural rebirth. The wealth of these republics was carved not just in ledgers but in stone. The Doge's Palace in Venice rises from the water, its pink and white marble facade a breathtaking fusion of Gothic lightness and classical order, a declaration that the state's authority was both majestic and rational. This was not a king's fortress but a merchant seat of government, its grandeur designed to impress foreign dignitaries and reassure local citizens of the republic's stability and immense prosperity. Across their domains, this commercial elite became the great patrons of the age, commissioning artworks that reflected their world. Giovanni Bellini's serene and detailed portraits, funded by Genoa's merchants, did not just depict saints and Madonnas. They captured a new, human-centered worldliness, a celebration of the same discerning eye that appraised the quality of silk or the value of a spice cargo. This was a renaissance of practical beauty, where art served both God and commerce, beautifying the city while advertising its cultural sophistication. The very layout of their cities was a testament to functional design. Canals served as efficient transport arteries, piazzas became open-air marketplaces and civic stages, and guild halls stood as monuments to the artisan trades that formed the backbone of the economy. This legacy of intelligent urban planning is why these cities remain magnetic to visitors centuries later, their beauty rooted in purposeful design. The Hanseatic League's influence is etched in the brick Gothic cathedrals that still define the skylines of cities from Lubeck to Tallinn. This distinct architectural style, characterized by soaring vertical lines and intricate brickwork, spread not through conquest but along trade routes, a physical manifestation of a shared commercial culture. Perhaps no single structure better symbolizes this blend of commerce and innovation than Venice's Rialto Bridge. A daring engineering feat of its time, its single marble arch spanning the Grand Canal was funded entirely by merchant taxes, creating a vital link between the markets that was as beautiful as it was indispensable. How did this cultural patronage reflect their core values? It demonstrated that their wealth was not for hoarding but for reinvestment into the civic fabric, building a legacy that would outlast any single business deal. Preserving these sites today teaches us that economic power, when paired with civic vision, can produce enduring beauty. Yet, for all these magnificent achievements, the true story of the merchant republics is often clouded by persistent myths and romantic oversimplifications. That romanticized painting of a doge in jeweled robes is a beautiful lie. It suggests a crowned monarch, obscuring the far more complex reality of merchant republic governance. The most persistent myth is that these states were bastions of equality, true democracies where every citizen had a voice. Nothing could be further from the truth. While they rejected hereditary kings, they erected their own rigid social pyramids, where power was determined by the weight of one's purse. Citizenship itself was a tiered privilege, often reserved for those born into established families or those who could pay a hefty fee, leaving a vast underclass of laborers and artisans with little political power. Another seductive oversimplification paints these republics as fundamentally peaceful, their influence spread solely by trade. This ignores the formidable war galleys they deployed to crush rivals and the brutal systems of exploitation that fueled their economies. Slavery was not an exception but a cornerstone of commerce in ports like Genoa's Caffa, where human beings were traded as coldly as bolts of cloth. Modern scholars remind us that the term republic often masked a harsh oligarchy. A handful of fabulously wealthy families typically monopolized the highest offices, creating a political glass ceiling that was nearly impossible to break. Even Venice's celebrated stability was a carefully managed facade. Behind the serene marble of the Doge's palace lay a world of secret police, intercepted letters, and swift justice for any who threatened the commercial elite's control. Popular uprisings like the revolt led by Bagiamont Tiepolo were not uncommon, revealing the deep fractures in a society that preached unity but practiced exclusion. So why do these myths persist? They offer a simpler, more palatable story, one that separates the glory of their art and architecture from the often ruthless business practices that paid for it. Acknowledging this full picture does not diminish their achievements, but rather deepens our understanding of their true nature, a volatile mix of innovation and oppression, civic pride and profound inequality. To truly grasp this complexity, we must move beyond the systems and meet the ambitious individuals who navigated this world, the doges, admirals, and traders whose personal ambitions became the engines of history. A blind 80-year-old man led a crusade to sack the greatest city in the Christian world. Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice, could not see the walls of Constantinople, but he understood their value with perfect clarity. His story is the ultimate embodiment of the Merchant Republic leader, a man whose faith was secondary to the balance sheet. When the Knights of the Fourth Crusade found themselves unable to pay for the Venetian fleet they had commissioned, Dandolo saw not a crisis of faith, but a business opportunity. He offered to forgive their immense debt in exchange for a simple diversion, helping a deposed Byzantine prince reclaim his throne. This was a classic Venetian investment, leveraging military power for future commercial returns. The plan spiraled into the infamous sack of Constantinople in 1204, a catastrophe for the Byzantine Empire but a windfall for Venice. Dandolo secured a priceless prize, not just plunder, but exclusive trade rights and control over key ports that would cement Venetian dominance in the eastern Mediterranean for generations. His personal ambition and commercial cunning became state policy, demonstrating how a single leader could harness the Republic's machinery for staggering profit. In Genoa, a different kind of leader emerged from the factional strife. Simone Boccanegra, a former pirate and merchant, was elected as the first Doge in a wave of popular support. He understood that the Republic's internal wars were bad for business. His great innovation was populist reform, creating a government that included not only the old noble families but also the rising class of ship captains and wealthy artisans. By balancing elite interests with the needs of the broader populace, Boccanegra temporarily stabilized Genoa's volatile politics, preventing the crippling revolts that so often paralyzed the city. His goal was to create a more predictable environment for commerce, proving that social peace was a sound investment. Far to the north, the Hanseatic League produced its own formidable figures, like Johann Wittenborg, the burgomaster of Lübeck. Wittenborg was a merchant to his core, and when the King of Denmark threatened the League's vital herring trade, he did not hesitate. He transformed merchant cogs into warships and led a Hanseatic fleet to attack Copenhagen. His goal was not territorial conquest, but the protection of a monopoly. Though his campaign ultimately failed and he was executed upon his return, his story highlights the immense personal risks these leaders took. Their authority was fragile, and a single failed venture could mean not just political ruin, but death. What united these diverse men was their primary identity as businessmen. Their political decisions were extensions of their commercial strategies, aimed at securing routes, breaking monopolies, or negotiating favorable tariffs. They navigated a world of constant risk, where a wrong calculation could lead to financial disaster or a dagger in a darkened alley. Yet their stories only represent one half of the human drama. While they commanded fleets and councils, the women of these republics were often the silent partners managing the entire enterprise from home, proving that the mercantile spirit knew no gender. The widow's signature on a shipping contract carried the same legal weight as any man's. In the bustling port of Genoa, a woman like Margherita Dattini could inherit her husband's entire commercial empire, overseeing a network of agents, settling complex debts, and directing the flow of goods from her home. While the council chambers were filled with men, the economic power of women formed the silent, sturdy backbone of these republics. Their influence flowed through three primary channels: inheritance, partnership, and patronage. A widow was not a passive recipient of wealth. She was expected to be a shrewd guardian of the family's capital, often reinvesting it into new ventures or using her dowry as a powerful financial tool to secure loans. As wives, they were de facto chief financial officers during their husbands' long absences, managing the account books, supervising warehouses, and ensuring the business survived until the next fleet returned. This was not a rare exception, but a common necessity in a society built on long-distance trade. The story of Caterina Cornaro illustrates how these familial roles could scale to the highest levels of diplomacy. Born into a powerful Venetian family, her marriage to the King of Cyprus was a state-sponsored business deal designed to bring the strategic island under Venetian influence. When the king died, Caterina did not retreat. She ruled as queen before eventually ceding control to Venice, her life a testament to how women could be used as living instruments of foreign policy. How did this compare to the lives of women in feudal manors? The contrast was stark. In a rural, land-based society, a woman's identity and property were almost entirely subsumed by her husband or father. In the merchant republics, urban life and the primacy of movable wealth created unique legal loopholes. Women could, and did, appear in court to defend their commercial interests. They could own property outright and bequeath it in their wills, yet profound limitations persisted. A woman's public voice was often funneled through male relatives, and her political rights were virtually non-existent. Her economic agency was usually an extension of her family's name, a responsibility rather than a right. The true measure of their power is found not in the laws but in the quiet spaces of daily life. It was in the letters a merchant's wife sent to her husband abroad, filled with sharp market observations and advice on which commodities to buy. It was in the dowries they managed, which acted as the startup capital for the next generation. And it was in their patronage where wealthy women commissioned altarpieces and funded hospitals, shaping the cultural and charitable landscape of their cities with the same strategic eye they applied to business. This complex tapestry of influence, woven from legal rights and social constraints, was part of a broader social flexibility that extended even to matters of faith, where pragmatic tolerance often trumped rigid doctrine. A Venetian merchant in Crete might begin his day with a prayer in a Catholic cathedral and end it negotiating a contract in a room overlooking a minaret. This visual harmony was no accident, it was commercial policy. The merchant republics cultivated a pragmatic form of religious tolerance, not out of philosophical conviction, but because it was excellent for business. In a world torn by religious war, their ports became islands of calculated coexistence, where the flow of goods mattered more than the details of doctrine. They understood that to dominate global trade, they needed to attract and retain the best merchants, bankers, and craftsmen, regardless of their faith. This meant granting religious minorities like Jews and Muslims the right to live, work, and worship in their territories, a level of inclusion almost unheard of in the feudal kingdoms of the era. A traveler visiting the Hanseatic contour in Novgorod would have witnessed a similar scene. Inside its fortified walls, German Lutheran merchants lived and worked alongside the local Russian Orthodox population. They respected each other's holy days and settled commercial disputes through neutral arbitration, ensuring that the vital fur and wax trade continued uninterrupted by theological disagreements. Primary benefit was economic dynamism. Jewish communities, often barred from owning land in Christian Europe, excelled in finance, medicine, and long-distance trade. Their networks, which stretched across the Muslim and Christian worlds, became invaluable channels for information and capital. In Venice, the very creation of the ghetto in 1516 was a paradox of tolerance and restriction. While it physically segregated the Jewish population, it also officially sanctioned and protected their presence. The gates were locked at night, but during the day, Jewish merchants, moneylenders, and doctors were free to conduct business throughout the city. The Venetian state recognized that their financial expertise was crucial, especially for providing loans to the less wealthy and facilitating the complex machinery of commerce. This conditional acceptance, however, was a fragile peace. It could shatter in an instant. When a plague struck or a war was lost, religious minorities often became convenient scapegoats for a frightened populace facing sudden persecution or expulsion. The same council that protected them for their economic utility could just as easily turn against them to appease public anger or the demands of the Catholic Church. The deep-seated religious prejudices of medieval society were merely managed, not eradicated. So how did this system of pragmatic tolerance shape their global networks? It allowed for a remarkable exchange of more than just commodities. In the diverse markets of Alexandria or the blended society of Venetian Crete, merchants exchanged mathematical knowledge, medical texts, and shipbuilding techniques along with spices and silks. This cross-pollination of ideas, born from necessity and a shared desire for profit, fueled innovations that would ripple through European science and culture for centuries. The merchant republics proved that diversity could be a formidable economic advantage, a lesson written not in scripture, but in the soaring profits of their ledgers. The formidable walls of Dubrovnik were not built for conquest, but for calculated independence. This was the Republic of Ragusa, a sliver of a state that carved out centuries of prosperity by mastering the art of the possible. Wedged between the Ottoman Empire and the Christian powers of Venice and Hungary, Ragusa's survival depended on a single, unwavering policy: declared neutrality. Its small but agile fleet became the universal carrier, trusted by all sides to transport goods through the war-torn Mediterranean. While empires clashed, Ragusan merchants quietly grew wealthy, their fortunes built on two humble but essential commodities: salt from their own pans and silver from the Balkan interior. How did such a small player command such respect? Its government was a masterpiece of balanced power. A rector served as a head of state, but his term lasted only a single month, a deliberate check against any individual accumulating too much influence. True authority rested with the Senate, a body of merchant aristocrats who governed with a long-term commercial vision. This stability allowed for astonishingly progressive laws. Ragusa abolished the slave trade in 1417, a moral and economic calculation that set it apart from its contemporaries. It also established one of the earliest and most effective quarantine systems in Europe, using isolated islands and lazarettos to control the spread of plague, a public health innovation that protected both its people and its economy. The Republic's diplomatic genius lay in its dual identity. It formally acknowledged the sovereignty of the Ottoman Sultan, paying an annual tribute that bought it something far more valuable than independence: it bought access. This arrangement granted Ragusan merchants exclusive trading privileges deep within the Balkans, allowing them to channel Ottoman goods into European markets. Simultaneously, its staunchly Catholic faith and vibrant Latin culture ensured its ties to Rome, and the Italian Renaissance remained strong. This cultural fluency made Ragusa a surprising hub of literature and science, where merchant elites funded humanist scholars and built libraries, their patronage proving that commercial wealth could fuel an intellectual golden age. The ultimate lesson of Ragusa is one of strategic humility. It never sought to be an empire, only a successful intermediary. Its longevity teaches us that a small state, when led by pragmatic and forward-thinking merchants, can outmaneuver far more powerful neighbors not by force, but by making itself indispensable to everyone. This model of survival through service required a financial acumen as sophisticated as its diplomacy, leading to monetary innovations that would quietly shape economic thought for generations. The numbers in a Genoa's ledger told a story of risk and reward that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. This was double-entry bookkeeping, a system where every transaction was recorded twice as both a debit and a credit. It created an unprecedented clarity, a transparent financial portrait that let investors trust the accounts of a captain they would never meet. This accounting breakthrough was the silent guardian of their vast commercial networks, turning chaotic trade into a manageable science. The most revolutionary tool was the bill of exchange. This was not mere money, but a promise, a piece of paper that allowed a merchant in Bruges to pay for English wool with funds his partner had deposited back in Florence. It meant wealth could travel across kingdoms without a single gold coin ever leaving a strongbox, a system that drastically reduced the risk of piracy and theft on the open road. To protect their massive investments in these perilous sea journeys, Genoa's merchants pioneered modern marine insurance. An investor could now pay a premium to insure a ship's cargo. If the vessel sank, the insurer would cover the loss. If it arrived safely, the insurer kept the fee as pure profit. This brilliant mechanism of shared risk meant that no single merchant faced utter ruin from one storm. It encouraged capital to flow into ever more ambitious voyages, fostering a culture of entrepreneurship that reached beyond the old aristocratic families. How did these financial tools transform medieval commerce? They supercharged it. The ability to move money safely and insure against disaster created a stable platform for economic explosion. Capital was no longer trapped in land or locked in vaults. It was fluid, mobile, and seeking out the highest return anywhere in the known world. This entire system, however, provoked a profound ethical dilemma. The Catholic Church forbade usury, the charging of interest on loans. But how could you finance a 2-year trading voyage without compensating investors for the risk and the time their money was tied up? The merchant republics found clever, often convoluted ways to navigate this moral hazard. Interest was disguised as a voluntary gift or baked into the exchange rates of bills of exchange. It was a constant negotiation between spiritual doctrine and commercial necessity, a tension that forced the development of more sophisticated and arguably more honest financial instruments. The ultimate expression of this financial ingenuity was the creation of tradable debt. Venice issued state-backed bonds known as prestiti to fund its wars and infrastructure projects. Citizens could buy these bonds, effectively lending money to the state, and then sell that debt to other investors on a secondary market. This was the birth of public debt and the precursor to the stock exchanges that would later arise in Antwerp and Amsterdam. These markets demonstrated that a promise of future payment could itself become a valuable commodity, a concept that would become the bedrock of modern capital. The merchant republics had built an economic engine of incredible power, but its very success attracted a new kind of attention, one that would test their diplomatic cunning to its absolute limit. The same Genoa's ledger that meticulously tracked the price of pepper also contained cold entries for human cargo. In the slave markets of their Crimean colony at Kaffa, people were assessed, priced, and sold with the same detached calculation as any other commodity, their lives reduced to lines in a merchant's account book. This stark reality forces us to confront the profound moral ambiguities at the heart of these commercial empires. For all their groundbreaking innovations in law and governance, their vast wealth was often built upon foundations of profound exploitation. Slavery was not a peripheral activity but a central pillar of commerce, fueling the labor on sugar plantations in Venetian Crete and staffing the households of the Genoese elite. Beyond the trade in human lives, their colonial policies frequently amounted to systemic oppression. The Hanseatic League's relentless pursuit of fur and wax in Eastern Europe did not simply involve trade with indigenous communities. It actively depleted local resources and disrupted centuries-old social structures, imposing an economic dependency that served only the League's bottom line. This single-minded pursuit of profit did not go unchallenged in their own time. Religious thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas directly criticized the materialistic values driving these states. He argued that a just price must consider the common good, and that the relentless drive for profit, when it overrode justice and fairness, was a moral failing. The merchant republics, in their quest for monopoly control, often violated this very principle, using their economic might to crush competitors and dictate unfair terms to weaker societies. So how do we reconcile our admiration for their legal and economic genius with the condemnation of their deep-seated injustices? This is not a question with an easy answer. We can acknowledge that their systems of contract law and banking were revolutionary, while also recognizing that these same systems were used to legitimize and manage the brutal slave trade. We can marvel at the cosmopolitan tolerance of their port cities, while understanding that this coexistence was often a pragmatic strategy for profit, not a commitment to human equality. The legacy of the merchant republics is not a simple monument to be either celebrated or torn down. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliant innovation and dark exploitation. Their story teaches us a difficult but crucial lesson about our own world. The engines of global capitalism they helped invent continue to generate immense wealth and technological progress, yet they also perpetuate inequalities and can incentivize exploitation. The fundamental question they force us to ask is the same one that troubled medieval theologians. Can a system focused primarily on economic gain ever truly be reconciled with justice? Or is some form of moral compromise an inherent cost of commercial power? This unresolved tension between the ledger and the soul is perhaps their most enduring and challenging bequest to the modern world. A modern container ship docking in Rotterdam operates on principles a Venetian merchant would instantly recognize. The intricate dance of global supply chains, with goods flowing from specialized producers to distant consumers, is a direct descendant of the networks first perfected by the merchant republics. Their foundational idea that wealth is created by facilitating exchange and allowing regions to focus on what they do best underpins our entire concept of globalization. The World Trade Organization, with its complex agreements on tariffs and fair competition, is the spiritual successor to the Hanseatic League's standardized commercial codes designed to build trust and predictability across borders. The resilience of our financial system also owes a debt to their ingenuity. The fintech platforms moving money across the globe in seconds are the logical evolution of the Genoa bill of exchange. Their early experiments with marine insurance and joint stock companies created the very blueprint for managing risk and pooling capital that drives modern venture capital and global investment. When a corporation today uses international arbitration to settle a cross-border dispute, it is invoking a practice refined in the Admiralty courts of these medieval ports, where neutral judges provided swift justice to keep commerce flowing. This mercantile logic finds its purest modern expression in city-states like Singapore and Dubai. These hubs, thriving on commerce, finance, and diplomacy rather than territorial size or natural resources, are the direct heirs to Venice and Genoa. They have built their power by creating stable, business-friendly environments, attracting global talent, and positioning themselves as indispensable intermediaries in the flow of goods and capital, proving that the city-state model remains remarkably potent. On a continental scale, the European Union's single market, with its tariff-free movement of goods and people, powerfully echoes the Hanseatic League's network of reciprocal trade privileges. Both were built on the understanding that removing barriers to commerce creates mutual prosperity far greater than any one member could achieve alone. So what can these historical examples teach us about contemporary challenges? In an age of trade wars and rising inequality, the merchant republics offer a stark lesson. Their history demonstrates that protectionism and economic isolation often lead to stagnation, while cooperation and open exchange fuel long-term growth. Yet their legacy also carries a warning. Their immense wealth created stark social divisions, reminding us that economic power, if left entirely unchecked, can concentrate into the hands of a privileged few. The enduring question they leave us with is not whether commerce can shape our world, but whether we can harness its power to build a system that is both dynamic and just. To fully grasp their place in history, we must now see how their unique form of power compared to the traditional feudal kingdoms that surrounded them. A king's court echoed with the clanking of armored knights. Their loyalty pledged to a crown passed through bloodlines. Just a few hundred miles away, a council of merchants debated the price of wool in a room lined with ledgers, their authority drawn from shared investment. These two worlds, the feudal monarchy and the merchant republic, operated on fundamentally different principles. The feudal state measured its strength in acres of land and the number of lances a lord could summon to his banner. Its economy was rooted in the soil, its social order rigid and unchanging, designed to preserve the power of a hereditary aristocracy. This system prized military honor and territorial conquest, ambitions that often led to costly, dynastic wars that drained treasuries and disrupted the lives of common farmers. The merchant republic, by contrast, measured power in the liquidity of its assets and the reach of its shipping lanes. Its strength was not in land, but in the constant, fluid motion of goods and money across the seas. Where a feudal king might go to war over a disputed valley, a merchant council would calculate the cost and instead dispatch a diplomat to negotiate a preferential trade deal, a strategy that achieved wealth and influence without the ruinous expense of battle. This divergence in purpose created vastly different legal environments. A feudal court was bound by ancient customs and the concept of divine right, a system that changed at a glacial pace and was often mired in local tradition. Justice could be slow, unpredictable, and vary from one manor to the next. The merchant republics, needing swift resolutions for commercial disputes that might involve partners from 3 different continents, developed legal codes based on practical necessity. Their maritime laws and contract rules were adaptable, designed to be understood by foreigners and enforced quickly by expert arbiters. This legal agility gave them a critical advantage. They could respond to a financial crisis or a pirate threat in a matter of weeks, while a kingdom might be paralyzed for years by court intrigue and the slow gathering of a feudal levy. The sheer success of the Republican model did not go unnoticed by the kings they often sought to circumvent. Historians point to documents like the English Magna Carta, which included specific clauses protecting the rights of merchants to travel and trade freely. This was not a spontaneous invention of English barons, but a recognition of practices perfected in the Italian city-states. Monarchies began to see that their own power could be enhanced by adopting mercantile strategies. France, under ministers like Colbert, later embraced a policy of economic nationalism, actively promoting its own industries and trade companies in a clear imitation of the Republican playbook. They began to borrow money from Genoese bankers and consult with merchant advisors, slowly absorbing the very systems that had once challenged their authority. So what were the inherent advantages of each system? The feudal monarchy possessed a profound strength in unity of command and the ability to project massive, if slow-moving, military force across land. Its cultural cohesion and deep-rooted traditions provided a stable, if inflexible, social order. The Merchant Republic excelled in economic innovation, rapid adaptation, and the efficient generation of wealth. Its government was a nimble instrument of commerce, but it often struggled with internal factionalism and lacked the deep reserves of manpower that a large kingdom could call upon. In the end, the monarchies prevailed not because their model was superior in every way, but because their scale was simply overwhelming. The rising nation-states of the early modern period combined the territorial mass and centralized authority of a monarchy with the economic policies they had learned from the republics. They became hybrid giants, too large and too powerful for even the wealthiest of city-states to resist. This great convergence of models, the blending of crown and commerce, would ultimately chart the course for the modern world. The true power of these republics was never in their thrones, for they had none. It was in the quiet, relentless logic of the ledger, a system of rule that redefined authority for centuries. Their legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of brilliant innovation and dark contradiction. We admire the soaring beauty of Venetian architecture and the Hanseatic League's standardized laws that built trust across continents. Yet we cannot ignore the human cost recorded in the same ledgers that tracked bolts of silk, the stark reality of slave markets and exploited colonies. These states grappled with the very tensions we face today, the struggle between incredible wealth and profound inequality, between open commerce and the desire for monopoly, between pragmatic tolerance and deep-seated prejudice. Their greatest lesson is not a simple answer, but an enduring question. How do we harness the dynamic power of commerce to build a society that is both prosperous and just? The stories of Venice, Genoa, and the Hanseatic League prove that economic ingenuity and forms of representative governance have deep historical roots, offering timeless insights into balancing profit with ethics in an interconnected world. Let this hidden history inspire you to look at our own global economy with fresh eyes. Which of these merchant republics, with its unique blend of ambition and flaw, fascinated you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corridors of our past. Together, we keep these stories alive, ensuring the lessons of history continue to inform the choices we make for our